As I said earlier, we're on this series of Meals with Jesus, places where either Jesus has provided a meal or has been invited to a meal, and we see that there are so many places where Jesus goes for a meal and uses it as an opportunity to get a message across. And today we're going to reach Luke 14, and Luke 14 is a really long chapter, and he kind of makes quite a lot of points in that chapter, so we've split it into two. Today I'm going to look at the first 14 verses, and then next week Doug Preston is going to come and look at the second half. It starts with the Pharisees, the kind of religious leaders, inviting Jesus to a meal. And you kind of feel it's a trap. No, you kind of feel like it's a trap. They're getting Jesus there in order to kind of catch him out, interrogate him, put him in a situation where they think he's going to do something wrong, but Jesus points out actually he's doing something right. And it's all about those laws, those laws that they're living in, the Old Testament laws, some of those that Carol mentioned last week. But Jesus uses it as an opportunity to turn it around and say that was then, but this is now. And during his bit, in this first 14 verses, Jesus makes 3 points that makes them all feel very uncomfortable because of where they're at compared to where Jesus is at. We're going to read the first 6 verses. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of the prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of was a man suffering from abdominal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and the experts of the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, if you had a child or an ox that fell into a well on the Sabbath, would you not immediately pull it out? And again, they had nothing to say. Jesus is trying to point out sometimes we just need to help others. We need to remember that at this point, we're all looking at the Bible now. Now with what we know, we can look at the Bible and say, oh yeah, that's what he meant. Then they'd only got the Old Testament books, the Torah, and that's what the Pharisees lived by. It was law. And Jesus came to bring something new. Jesus came to bring mercy, compassion, forgiveness, essentially love. He came as a man to bring love. That doesn't fit with what the Pharisees see. You've got to do this to fit in. You've got to do this to be clean. You can't do that if you want to be acceptable. And it feels like in this situation, they're setting Jesus up so that they can use that against him going forward. In verse 1 it says, doesn't it? They are watching him carefully. Usually when you get invited round to dinner at someone's house, they're not all staring at you, waiting for you to pick up the wrong fork or something like that. But in this way, it shows that they're out to get him. In Luke chapter 11, it said they were lying in wait for him to catch him in something he might say. So we see it's getting very personal, and they're trying to set a trap. In verse 2, we're told that there's a man there who's got abnormal swelling in his stomach. He shouldn't be there. If this is the Pharisees meeting in a place together, the Pharisees shouldn't be with that bloke. And yet they've invited him in. Why? To catch Jesus out. And he knows what they're doing. He can see immediately what they're doing. They want him to heal this man on the Sabbath, which is not allowed. The illness the man had is incurable, but he needs help. And all of a sudden, why is he at the Pharisee's house? Why is he allowed to be there? And so Jesus turns it around immediately. He knew what they were trying to do. He knew where their hearts were. And he asked them the question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? He knew in their heads, they will go, no, can't do that. You shouldn't do that, Jesus. You're going to do that, we're going to catch you. And then he asks again, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or do harm, to save or destroy? And he keeps kind of poking them, really, because he knows that they want to catch him. And then he catches them. Which of you, having a son or an ox that had fallen into a well, would not pull them out, would not save them? And they all just stand there, looking at him, silent, because they don't know how to answer, which doesn't catch them out. Their plan has failed. Jesus knows that all this hypocrisy, we're told to love people, we're told to serve people, we're told to love before following the law, really. And here they are just ignoring it. They want to catch Jesus out. Jesus says, is it lawful to love your neighbour on the Sabbath? That's what he's asking them, really. If your neighbour's in a mess, if your neighbour needs help, should you say, well, no, come back tomorrow? Yesterday we were driving to work and taking Poppy to school, and we drove past somebody. We think it was an older gentleman who'd fallen, and it looked like he'd face planted, and there was lots of, not nice. But the people around him, should they have left him? Should they have helped him? It's natural instinct, isn't it, to support people, to help people. But the Pharisees are saying on a Sunday, on Sabbath day, no. And Jesus is saying it doesn't matter when it is. If someone comes knocking and someone asks for help, you should go the extra mile to show them love, show them compassion, and to help them. And Jesus is asking, what stops us getting into relationship with people? What stops us doing things that we should do? What rules have we put in place that actually we need to get rid of, just so we can get on and help people? I think this place, maybe if we followed the rules every day, I don't think we'd be allowed to be here, let alone anybody else. In that time, rules dominated relationships. Order controlled love. But Jesus came to bring something new. Jesus came to be with people, not above people. Jesus came to support people, not condemn them. And I think that's what the Pharisees were doing. They were doing everything they can to stick by their rules. Because by those rules, the Pharisees were in charge. They had power. So Jesus would just push a little bit further. And he essentially was saying, what are you willing not to do in order to stick with your power, your rules, your regulations? And they didn't have an answer. And I suppose that's the question for us, is what do we do? What do we say we can't do? It's the old Meatloaf song, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. What won't we do to show people love? Is it the way they dress, their style of music, the things they do, the things they replace, where they come from, what they believe? Jesus said we're called to love them all. And that's the point he was trying to make to the Pharisees. On my first day here, years ago, I came in trying to look smart, don't do that anymore. Came to look smart, wear a nice pair of trousers, nice smart shirt, and I brought a suit jacket with me. And if anybody remembers Helen, who was Sarah's predecessor, Helen said, right, should we have a walk around Wood End? Oh, great way to start on my first day. I said, yeah, okay. I said, I'll be back in a minute. I got my suit jacket because it was cold. I started in October. I said, of course, I'm just going to get my coat. And as soon as I walked back into the office, she went, take that off. Oh, hello, why? Just take it off. I said, I'm not going that, it's cold. Just take it off. And she kind of took it off in a pretty scared way. And I said, what's the problem? And she said, they'll think you're a bailiff. She says, people don't dress like that round here. And if they see you like that, they won't accept you. They won't open the door. They won't say hello. And I quickly learned, actually, I needed to go by their rules and just show them love. So that day I froze to death while we walked round. But actually, people spoke to us. If I'd got my jacket on, they probably wouldn't even made eye contact. Jesus knew what we've got to do in order to love people. He goes on to try and teach them about being humble. He says this from verse 7. When he noticed how the guests... I had nothing to say. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honour at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honour. For a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say, "Friends, move up to a better place. Then you will be honoured in the presence of all of the guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who are humble will be exalted." I think I've told this story before. A few years ago, I went to an event at church in the centre of town, and I was the first person there. Apart from all the tech people and musicians, I was the first person there. And I walked into an empty church. And I thought, right, I'll get out of the way. I'm a tall bloke, I'll sit somewhere where I'm not going to be in the way. So I picked this particular pew and sat in the middle, which the kind of sound stuff was behind me, so I wasn't going to be in his way. And I sat there for about 10 minutes on my own, and slowly other people came in. And then this tiny lady, little old lady, came up to me and said, "Excuse me, yeah, you're in my seat." And I looked to the left, and I looked to the right, and I looked in front, and I was the only person there. And I laughed. So, "No, I'm serious, you're in my seat." So I just shimmied along a bit. She went, no, that's my friend's seat." I suddenly felt humiliated. I felt pretty angry as well, but I felt humiliated. I thought, how can we put someone in that situation, in an empty building, to be told you can't sit there? But then I had the opposite situation. Well, many years ago, the mission was involved with Grace Academy, the school down the road, and there was an event going to be on at the cathedral. And some of us were invited by Grace to be part of this event. And so the 3 or 4 of us that went all felt a bit, the thing was full of the Grace Academy students and, the important people, all the leaders of the school. And then we turned up. So we got a seat at the back. We felt quite safe at the back. And then somebody came and said, "Hang on, you're from Coventry City Mission, aren't you?" "Yes." "Follow me." And we whispered, and we kind of got up and thought, what's going on? And we were taken to the front row of the cathedral with all of these students watching us. And then when the event started, they said, "Follow us again." And we got taken to the back. I think, what's going on here? But it was so we could parade in. And all of a sudden, it was like the top table of the wedding. I prefer being at the back. Where we go isn't important, as long as it's where the Lord wants us. We get put in places of honour by Lord, not by us. There isn't a top table in here, unless it's obviously Crystal's seat. Nobody sits in Crystal. I just checked it's not in the earth. Nobody sits in Crystal's seat. I was very tempted today to just start the service from there, but I thought she might have a fit. We're all the same. There's no posh tables, no posh seats in here. We're all the same. We can't, inflate ourselves. We can't make ourselves more important. I did a mission many years ago in Slovakia with a colleague of mine. We went out to Slovakia for about 10 days, and we were travelling all over the country, and we would stop in a different place every night, and we'd either be stopping in the church or we'd stop at somebody's house. And we were coming to the end, and we were all pretty tired. And we were in the part of Slovakia which was on the edge of the Hungarian border. In fact, the town was half Slovak and half Hungarian. And we were preaching in the church, and we were told, "Don't worry about accommodation tonight, you're stopping in a local's house." It was like, oh, so she's back now, look, now we've finished talking about it. And we thought, it's okay, the sermon happened, the service happened, and then they said, right, so where are we going to, where we're sleeping? And this little old Slovakian lady who had no English kind of beckoned us to go and get in this really dodgy looking car. There's about 7 of us in a Mini. And they took us off, and it was getting less and less nice. Is the most polite way of putting it. We were going to a really dodgy part of Slovakia, and I was thinking, my colleague was kind of elbowing me. "We're not stopping here." just shut up. And then we got to it was like a block of flats, and we went in, and he kept saying, "I'm not stopping here." And then we got to their flat, and the door opened, and every room didn't have a door, it had a curtain. And I just happened, I thought, peep. And I looked behind the first curtain, there was someone in bed, fast asleep. And we got talking to this room, which was about, you could probably fit it in this room about 6 times. And that was going to be for 3 of us. I was going to have to share like a roll out bed with my friend. And it only kind of would have gone to my knees. It wasn't long enough for my colleagues are now getting really stressed. I'm not stopping. Go and do something. Work it out. Got shoved out of the room. And I managed to find the person with us who spoke Slovak and English. And I said, look, my friend was, while he's been preaching, he's kind of hurt his leg and he really needs a decent night's sleep. We're not going to be able to sleep here. Could you take us to a hotel? I felt awful. This poor lady's face, she looked totally rejected. But we got back into the car and got taken to a local hotel. It was now about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I managed to say to them, if you've got 2 single rooms, paid the money. And my friend was getting really stressed at this point, he was really grumpy. And this guy gave us 2 sets of keys, and he said, follow me. And the first door we came to, he says, this is the first room. Open the door. And my colleague just kind of barged the door open, took the keys off us, and shut the door. I thought, oh, okay. And the guy said, follow me. He says, this is your room. And we went a slightly different way. And I noticed I'd got 2 keys, not 1 key like he had. And the guy said, okay. And we opened the first door, and there was a room. But then there was a sunken bath. And there was a big, nice kind of lounge area. He says, no, this key opens this. And it opens kind of like a theatre, like a church meeting room almost. And he says, look, here's the control to the telly. And there was something like a 30-foot screen on the wall. So I'd kind of sat back and had a nice bath and kind of managed to get out of the bath and then put the telly on and watched Champions League football for a couple of hours all by myself. Next morning when I found my mate, he was so grumpy. He'd had a single bed, he'd had a terrible night's sleep. He said, how are you? He said, oh, I feel wonderful. He pushed himself to be first. If he'd just hung back a bit, he could have had all that because I didn't really want it. But sometimes God says to us, you know what? The first shall be last, the last shall be first. Just hold back and wait for God to direct us. And that's what he was saying to the Pharisees. You might have a position of power, but actually God's in charge. You're called to love people. You're called to humble yourselves, but they didn't want to do it. And then the final bit I want to mention, in verse 12, it says, then Jesus said to his host, the Pharisee, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbours. If you do, they may invite you back, so you'll be repaid. But when you give a banquet instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will see and be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid in the resurrection of righteousness. He wants the heart of God to be within them. He wants them to invite people to the table that need to be invited. How many times do we get invited to something, but actually we don't need to be? There's no need. It's just for the fun of it. And he was pointing out that Jesus had come to the earth for all of us, for the sinners, for the people who got it wrong. And the Pharisees still saw their role as somebody who was fine, somebody who was perfect, somebody that was following the rules so they got nothing wrong. We were saying, forget that. If we want to be in relationship with God, we need to humble ourselves by in front of him, and he will accept us. And that love and mercy and compassion will be for them as well as for everyone. So he was encouraging them again. The one thing they did that was right, but for the wrong reason, was invite the guy with an illness. He shouldn't have been there, but Jesus would have only been with him. Because Jesus would have said, actually, he needs Jesus. He needs God. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to love people in a different way. Why do we do the cafe? We want people to be able to eat. We want people to be able to be warm. We want people to be able to be in a place where they're welcome, where they're welcomed by friends and can sit in community together. It's not about money. If it was, we'd have stopped about a day after we started it. But actually we're called to love people. And that's the point that Jesus was making. And there's a famous song by Isaac Watts, a hymn, "Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all." We can't pay God back for Jesus dying on the cross or what he's done for us, but we've been invited to the table, and we need to make sure we accept the invitation, but actually that we also invite others, because that was what we're called to do. Amen. Final song, please.